Welcome back to the Rooted Home Life podcast, where we talk about cultivating home and chasing adventure with our children. On today's episode, I am so excited to be interviewing one of my favorite authors, Durenda Wilson, who has written 4 books. And 2 of her books I've read over the last couple of years. Some of you may be familiar with The Unhurried Homeschooler, a simple, mercifully short book on homeschooling. I've also read The 4-Hour School Day, which was a really good one. Highly recommend both of those. And I am currently in the middle of reading her brand new book, Raising Boys to Men, a simple and mercifully short book on raising and homeschooling boys. It is an honor to have Durenda here with us today as she talks to us specifically about raising boys. So Durenda, in case there is anyone who doesn't know you or is not familiar with you at all, could you just introduce yourself a little bit so that they have a little bit of a frame of reference as you share with us today?
Absolutely. And I am sure that there are plenty out there who haven't heard of me. I always like to say, I feel like maybe a small fish in a small pond, something like that. But anyway, if you don't know me, never heard of me, I am married to Daryl, and I've been married to him for almost 35 years. Actually, in about a month, it's our 35th anniversary.
Oh,
And we have 8 kids, 5 boys, 3 girls, ages 19 to 33. We have 12 grandkids. They're all 10 and under. And 8 of them are boys. So we definitely weigh in heavy on the boy end of things, which we love. And we've been homeschooling for over 30 years. We have our youngest still technically homeschooling. He hasn't earned his diploma yet. He is on the spectrum. And so we're just taking our time. He would even say, nope, I'm not ready for my diploma yet. So we're working on some life skills, some things like that. To get him where he feels good about receiving his diploma. So that's where we're at. We've been at this for a long time, and I just love being able to get on and encourage moms. Specifically, lately, it's been encouraging boy moms, because being a boy mom has been one of the most wonderful experiences for me. And so I love to be able to share my heart with other moms who are raising boys to men.
I love that so much. I read your book, Unhurried Homeschooler. I don't know how many years ago now, but I actually have a picture of me reading it in my mind, sitting on my couch, staring at my Christmas tree. So I just remember like reading it at night and loving it, and loving that it was like short and to the point, but also just had like so much goodness to take from it. And then I read your 4-Hour School Day, which I absolutely loved. And I remember where I was reading that as well. And the funny part is when I just started reading your book, Raising Boys to Men, actually, I think I started it before I went away, but we were recently in the Adirondacks. We were away. It was a very restful trip, which was great. And I was reading your newest book, Raising Boys to Men. And I remembered that I had read The 4-Hour School Day on that same trip, I think 2 years ago. I don't think
Oh,
it was
wow.
last summer, but the summer before. And I thought, wow, like this is pretty cool.
That's
So
awesome.
I was really excited for the book because I loved your other books, and also because I have 3 boys. So I knew that I would love your book, but then also I know you have 5 boys.
Right.
I have 5 children, and 3 out of my 5 are boys. So I was really excited to hear from someone not only that has boys and has raised boys, but has like done it all the way through.
Hmm.
Right. And so I feel like there's so much to gain from like moms talking to each other and sharing with each other and being able to encourage other moms, but then also being able to learn from moms that have actually done it all the way.
Hmm.
Like they've done it all the way through, raising boys in a particular way, but then
Right.
also choosing to homeschool those boys, which is like a whole other layer. So I was really excited, and I'm only about halfway through, but I'm kind of taking my time to digest it and not rush through it, even though my tendency is to like speed through it. And
Right.
it's been so good already. So I'm so excited to actually get to hear from you about it. I know for me on YouTube and Instagram and talking to moms in real life, I hear so many concerns from moms about boys, about their boys. Either they're aware that their concern is um, that their child that they're talking about is a boy, or
Hmm.
they're talking about these concerns and not realizing that it's because they're a boy.
Right. Right.
So why would from your heart, I would love to hear why you think like this message in your book is so important for moms of boys specifically.
Yeah, I really think that the culture and the church even is in a crisis when it comes to masculinity. And I'm seeing some shifting, some changing, which has been fantastic to see. I think it's being recognized really across the board that our boys are struggling, and they're struggling for a lot of reasons. We have been lied to, we continue to be lied to in all kinds of ways about gender, about masculinity. And we can even say that we'd like to think that the culture hasn't influenced us when it comes to how we think about our boys, but we're just surrounded by it all the time. It's not like we're purposely taking that in. We might not even believe some of the things we hear, but sometimes we absorb it and we don't realize we have absorbed it, and it comes out in how we raise our boys. And it causes a lot of, I think it causes a lot of conflict, inner turmoil, especially for us as moms, because it's like we know that our boys are different, that they're supposed to be different, that they were created this way. But then we struggle in all these different scenarios where it feels like boys cannot ever be boys. They have to be girls on every level. And it's frustrating because the educational system is set up for a feminine approach. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot of sitting, a lot of studious work. And I realize there's a sliding scale for boys and girls as to,
Right.
how they do with that. But I would venture to say that most boys do not do well with it, especially in the early years. And so there's the educational struggle. There's the spiritual struggle of how do we raise our boys to be warriors, to
Mm-hmm.
be tender and kind and loving, but also know when to fight, when to stand up, when to say enough already.
Right.
So when is that supposed to happen? And then mentally, I think it's the same thing of all these lies that are floating around all the time that we're hearing that affect how boys think about themselves. And then, as moms, I think that sometimes we get really emotional about these things, and we don't realize that that's what's happening. So the whole point of the message of this book is to equip moms to recognize the differences, but not just recognize them and live with them, but embrace them,
Mm-hmm.
appreciate them, respect them, honor them, and make their boys feel like they are fearfully and wonderfully made, that God has a purpose and a plan for their lives, that they're in training right now, but God has some really big things for them. And we want them to be ready for those things. And so we get to participate in that preparation process along with hopefully strong male role models in our sons' lives. So I think that's really that, and so much more is really why the message of this book is so important for moms right now. I think that my hope, and maybe just from where I'm sitting, from the moms that I hear from, because so many great moms out there who love their sons so much and want to raise them well, but are sort of not sure what that's supposed to look like.
Mm-hmm.
But as they become equipped, and this has been the great thing about the feedback that I get from the book, is moms constantly telling me, oh my gosh, I'm not even haven't finished the book yet, but I've implemented what I've read so far, and it's working, and it's my boys are happy and they're thriving, and all these things. And then my hope is that, my short-term hope for the book was that families would be changed for the good when it comes to raising their sons. And my long-term hope was that there would ultimately be a shift in the culture towards God's word and his ways because of these warriors and dragon slayers that we're raising. That in 10 to 15 years, we're just going to see this huge shift in the culture, and all the knuckleheads that are
Mm-hmm.
in leadership right now are going to be replaced with men who have good heads on their shoulders, know what they're doing, know when to wage war, know when to back off, have discernment, wisdom, all the things that we need in leadership. And so that's my long-term hope.
All of that is so good. I love everything that you said, but specifically where you talked about embracing, not just like we're not like tolerating that boys are
Right.
different or like putting up with it or sort of trying to understand it, but like really embracing that they were designed that way for a very specific purpose and really see the value in it is just, I love that so much. And I feel like so many moms can use that perspective shift, even if their hearts are fully for their boys, but they're just
Right.
so far from understanding why they're so different and
Yes.
why they're struggling to connect and relate and like what the missing link is. So I'm so excited. Um,
Yeah.
not only for me to hear from you, but for everyone else as well. And why do you think that is, Durenda? Like, why do you think boys are so misunderstood?
Well, it's actually a really simple answer. It's profound in our day and age, but it's very simple. It's because boys are boys, they're not girls. We have, again, this feminine, everything's so much of our culture is overshadowed by femininity and what works for the woman, but
Mm.
there's not a lot that actually is geared towards the boys. And so there's just nothing. And so what we've got is also just a school system that, I'm sorry, I believe in my heart, I'm just going to be honest, and this isn't a put down on anybody who has their kids in school, but I'm sorry, but the school system is a terrible place
Mm.
for most boys. I talked about them being fearfully and wonderfully made. They're made to be active, busy, competitive, physical, and all this is frowned upon in
Yes.
the school system. And so what ends up happening is, because they don't fit this tiny little box, then all of a sudden it's like, well, we're now going to diagnose them with
Yes.
ADHD, ADD, and I'm not saying those things aren't real. I'm just saying that I think that we have drugged up a huge portion of our boys, and it's a huge, huge mistake. Because we're expecting them to be like girls, and we're like, well, since you're not like a girl, we're going to drug you up so that you are more like a girl.
Okay. We're going to fix
And
that.
and what we've done is we've taken this beautiful creature that God has created with amazing abilities and an amazing future, and we have dumbed them down, and
Mm.
we have made them feel like they're nothing. And their mental health, we know this across the board, is terrible. And I think that it's time for us to do something about that. And that's the cool thing is, moms, we may not be able to change everything around us, but we can certainly change how we're raising our boys. And so
Yeah.
I just remember when our son was in the hospital, he had transposition of the greater arteries and 2 holes in his heart when he was born, and he had an open heart surgery, and he was there for 3 days old, and then was there for like 2 months. And of course, in the process, you get to know these different nurses, and this one nurse that was in basically in an internship, um, she was telling me about her little boy who was really, really struggling in the classroom. And I'm listening to her, and he's like in first grade, and she's telling me all this stuff. And I leaned over and I said, I know exactly what the problem is. And she said, what? And I'm whispering to her like I have this huge secret. I said, he knows that he was made to run, jump, dig for worms, play with frogs. He knows where he's supposed to be, and he's not there. And that's where he needs to be. And so she looked at me kind of like, maybe I was a little bit crazy at first, but she was sort of taking it in. But I think this is what we have to remember, is this active energy that our boys have is a feature, not a bug. And it's
Yeah.
something that we have the privilege of directing and turning into something productive. But doing that in a way that is encouraging and not trying to get them to be what we want them to be, but rather to encourage them to grow into who God made them to be.
So much of, like, I'm seeing all these different pictures in my mind as you're talking, and all of these different moments where I've just seen this play out in my own boys' lives. And I'm so glad that you brought up school. And I know that it can be a hot button topic, but I was a teacher before I came home to homeschool my children. I taught middle and high school English, and my older 2 boys did attend both public and private school for a handful of years before we started homeschooling. And in all of those different aspects of me teaching, of them being in school, I saw all of this play out.
Right.
And it was like little by little, and then all at once, where it was just like, this just isn't working. And it's not just not working for my students, but it's not working for my kids. And I remember when we brought them home, it was within a matter of maybe a month, maybe 2 months. I'm not exactly sure the timing, but my husband and I really looked at each other and were like, oh my gosh, it's like they're back. Like where we saw them little by little kind of like create this outer shell sort of like protection from all of the different things that tear them down, because it's just not the proper design for them, just in so many ways. And I remember it was third grade that my son had a new teacher. She was new to teaching the third grade, and she had previously taught preschool. And this particular third grade class was very highly concentrated with boys. I would say it was minimum 75% boys. So third grade boys, right? And every single time I saw her, she looked flustered. Her face was red. She looked like she was visibly sweating and maybe even short of breath. And she contacted me more often probably than any other teacher had previously, although I was still pretty used to the contact, this was definitely an increase. And I thought to myself, well, she's in over her head. She doesn't
Right.
understand boys. She's just completely beside herself because she doesn't know what to do with them,
Right. Right.
you know?
And,
And
and
so,
teachers, their hands are tied. They have these expectations, and there's just so many rules and so many things that they have to follow. Even if they wanted to create the environment for the boys that they really need, they can't.
right.
And that's why, that's one of the reasons I didn't know I was going to have a bunch of boys. I had no idea when we decided to homeschool, because we decided from the very beginning before we had kids.
Mm,
But what was going through my mind was, well, if um if they have learning issues, or anything that could be something that's made fun of, that's misunderstood, that's misdiagnosed, any of those things, what better place for us to work those things out than in the safety, security of home, when they can be 100% themselves. That means that they can be honest with me. They can tell me when something is bothering them and why, and I can ask those questions at the right times in order to draw out what's going on with them. Proverbs says that the purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out. I'm saying man or woman of
yeah,
understanding draws them out. And we have that opportunity to do that with our kids in general, but specifically our boys, because they're not always very verbal. A lot of times, our girls might be better, not always, but a lot of times they're better at expressing
right.
themselves. Our boys struggle more with that. So that's where I feel like we as moms, we rock it in terms of equipping them to be able to communicate more clearly and authentically, and even unemotionally, in terms of just being able to, because a lot of times I know that I've seen my boys when they were younger and they would get frustrated with their emotion, with not being able to communicate, they get emotional about it. We think girls get emotional because they do, but boys also have their share of emotions. And so only they sometimes end up coming out as maybe appearing more violent than
Right. Right. Anger.
because they're very physical, and it
Right.
comes out as anger. And so, anyway, all that to say, we just felt like, if we've got this environment where our kids, we have a good relationship with our kids, and they feel like they can tell us if something's bothering them, they're going to make more progress quicker. They're going to learn a
Yeah.
whole lot more than if they're in a situation where, like you said, they have to put this crust on, this shell on, in order to survive. Being in survival mode is not conducive to learning. It's just
Right.
not. And
Right.
so if we can take them out of that and put them in an environment where um, they can thrive. And let me just say, I've talked a lot about, their activity, uh, their energy level, letting them be boys, quote unquote. I don't want anybody to mistake that as there are no boundaries.
Right.
Because that's actually one of the first things I talk about in the book, is how important boundaries are.
Hmm.
But it's where those boundaries are set and how they're set that makes such a difference in how our boys see themselves and their natural propensity towards being so different than us as moms. But as nurturers, we get to bring to the table teaching them how to be better communicators, how to know what they're feeling and how to express that in a respectful and honoring way. And um, so, we do have something to offer them, even though we're very different from them. God made it
Right.
so that we're matched up with them, especially in those early years. They feel like as they get older, they need to go more towards dad or a strong male role model. But in
Hmm.
those early years, they do need us to be
Hmm.
nurturers, but in the right way, not
Right.
babying them, not treating them not like they're little girls, but
Hmm.
actually kind of calling them up to manhood
Right.
a little at a
So I'm
time.
so glad that you brought up boundaries because there were two things in my head that I wanted to ask you. And the first one was in thinking about moms that maybe don't have a lot of experience with boys. Like you're an
Right.
expert of boys at this point, right? Like you've
Mhm.
experienced the full gamut of boyhood and all of
Yes.
its different stages. And so for moms maybe that don't have experience with boys, or maybe they didn't have brothers, because I've had mothers say that to me, like, I only had girls, or this is my first child and it's a boy, and I didn't have brothers, and this is just completely foreign to me. Like, what kind of things, what kind of behaviors should moms of boys kind of expect, like as normal, like where they may
Right.
think this is wrong, this is off, there's something wrong here, I just don't know what's wrong. And it's like, no, really, like this can be expected. This should be expected when you're
Right.
using boys. Could you
Yeah.
share like maybe your
Yes.
top things that you
Yes.
think?
Absolutely. I would say expect to be grossed out. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And, you know, as moms, we get to teach them to learn to read the room. Is this the right time and place for whatever grossness you're wanting to share with all of us.
Yeah.
And I still taught my boys table manners, things like that. And they would be like, why do we even have to worry about this? They would say that to me. And I would say, well, there may come a time when you are very interested in a young lady and she's going to have you come over to meet her parents and eat dinner, and you really want to eat like a civilized human being. And at
Yeah.
that point, you're going to want to impress her parents. And so
Right.
it doesn't mean you have to be this polite all the time. It just means that you know how to do it. And
Yes.
so that's what so things like that, but expect to be grossed out. Again, you decide where those boundaries are at the time. Expect them to push boundaries. That for us, a lot of times it had to do with rough housing in the house, which I'm not
Mhm.
a fan of. I still don't let my grandkids wrestle in the house. I'm like, you can take it
Mhm.
outside. Sometimes for a period of time, it's fine. But if we're all trying to visit and they're
Right.
all just like going at it in the middle of the room,
Right.
we can't even hear each other. Well, that's not okay. That's not the time and place for it. And that's
Mhm.
what we want to teach them. Read the room. Is this the time or place to roughhouse? And even maybe if they're doubtful, they can ask mom, can we go ahead and roughhouse? And so we
Mhm.
are teaching them those kinds of boundaries. And we need to keep those boundaries secure. We need to be also at the same time ready for reasonable, respectful compromises, because my boys have sometimes been like, well, what about this? What about this? And they had really good ideas. So instead of just saying no, I would listen and consider. And of course, they had to listen to me either way, but I tried to really consider what they had to say. And that little bit right there told them that they had something valuable to offer. They had ideas to offer that might be
Mhm.
different than mine. Sometimes there were things I didn't understand or variables in the equation I wasn't getting. And I wanted them to be able to know that they could tell me those things, and I wasn't going to just get mad at them and say, no, just listen to me, whatever. I would say expect to laugh a lot because they love to be goofy. And
Yeah.
honestly, one of the best things I've ever done and still do is to be goofy with them, you
Mhm.
know? Um, Also, I think expect to go to the emergency room. Just expect it. If you can
Yeah.
just say, this is not a tragedy. There doesn't need to be a lot of drama around it.
Yeah.
It's just, okay, this is part of having boys, and they need to do dangerous things. They really, really do. And I feel like our job is to keep them alive while allowing them to do as many of those dangerous things as we can.
Yeah.
I remember our 22-year-old daughter said to me about a year ago, she said, Mom, I've been thinking, she's number 7 out of the 8. So there was
Oh,
two
wow.
girls and then 4 boys and then a girl and then a boy. So she's that one
Wow.
girl. My husband calls her the petunia in the onion patch.
Oh.
And she said, Mom, I've been thinking about some of the things that you let the boys do. And I said, yeah. And she said, why? Why did you let them do those things? So I had to explain it to her that they needed to do these things. They
Mhm.
needed to know that their ideas, although I might not do them, they needed to try. And what the thing with boys that's super interesting is, so the difference between boys and girls, they do something, they get hurt. The girl says, that's enough. I don't want to do anymore. I'm done. I don't
Mhm.
want to do that again. Boys will go back for more.
Right.
And we look at them and kind of in our minds, maybe even out loud, we say, well, that's really stupid. How dumb is
Mhm.
that? We hear this all the time. Boys are just dumb. Men are so stupid. Why do they do those things? You see the memes flying around.
Right.
But here's what we have to keep in mind. The reason they're going back is because they want to conquer that thing.
Mm.
They're
Yeah.
looking at it as though, okay, it hurt that time, but if I do it a different way, can I make it not hurt?
Yeah. It's actual
And
problem solving and
it's
critical thinking, not
and it's
stupidity at that
and it's
point.
courage. It's
Right.
courage because
Right.
they're wanting to say, I want to overcome this thing. I want to
Yeah.
conquer this thing. So if we, and these are just all the little ways that we change our thinking about our boys, and it changes how we see what they're doing. It changes how we respond to them.
Mm.
Expect lots of physical activity. Like I mentioned before, it's a feature, not a bug.
Right.
Expect them to want to be independent. Sometimes they just don't want the girls around, and that includes us. And
Mm.
that's okay. What we really want to do is encourage that. We want to encourage
Right.
that time with their dads or with a strong male role mentor, or with other boys to be able to
Yeah.
wrestle and do the things with them. I didn't do those things with my boys because I didn't feel like I wanted to teach them that girls wrestle, but sometimes they do. I have a
Mhm.
granddaughter who's 8 and her brother is 9, and she'll run from across the room and tackle him. And that's just the kind of relationship they have. But I think as mom, I don't think it's terrible to play with them, especially when they're little or whatever. But I really think a lot of that should fall on dad. I don't know. I heard this the other day. It was amazing. I just want to share it real quickly because I used to be like, honey, to my husband, why are you chasing everybody? Why are you wrestling with them? It is time to wind down, not wind up. We're trying to go to bed and you're wrecking everything. And but I realized it needed to happen for whatever reason. It was natural and I shouldn't try to get in the way or stop it. Well, guess what I heard just literally a month ago? I don't know if it was a physical therapist or who was saying it, but they basically said the pressure, the resistance from wrestling, the resistance on the muscles and the tendons and all of that actually helps our kids relax and sleep better.
Wow.
And especially the boys. And so let them wrestle, let them do it. And we never did
It
have
does seem to amp up at bedtime.
it does, but it's just a thing. And I think it's a really like it's kind of like an across the board natural thing to do because I can't almost every mom I talk to deals with the same thing. So how do we want to respond to that now that we know that? Well, yeah, absolutely do it. Go for it, you know? And so anyway, I think the other things we can expect is, you know, to not like showers or baths. Some of them do, but a lot of them don't. They don't even, a lot of times they don't even care how they smell.
Yeah.
They don't even think about it. So again, that's something we can teach them. Like, okay, today's your shower day. You definitely need to shower. And this is what, you know, hygiene looks like. And someday this is going to matter to you. So trust me on
Mhm.
this. Expect them to develop more slowly than girls their age, especially early on, and just know that they will catch up. It's not something we need to panic about. It can be up to 2 years in the earlier years that they
Wow.
run behind in certain areas compared to girls. And then I think finally, this is so important for the teen years. Know that they're going to lose a chunk of their brains as
Mhm.
they approach puberty. And it's temporary, it's not forever. But their bodies are working really hard to grow from a boy to a man. And so, what we want to do is help them in that journey, let them own that part of that their journey with their dignity intact. And I think what that looks like is when we start to see things happening, like if a kid who at 10 years old, he was just so consistent taking out the garbage, doing all the
Mhm.
things, it's just been super great. And then all of a sudden he's not anymore and he's forgetting things and it's not complete and he gets distracted. So probably if you're hitting 11, 12, 13, somewhere in there, that's what you're running into is they're starting, their bodies are changing. And so just like we get brain fog and, you know, PMS, perimenopause, menopause, all of those hormone shifts, it's the same thing for them. A lot of times they get brain fog as well. So we need to meet them where they're at. We're still going to hold their feet to the fire, but
Mhm.
we're going to have some grace there for them and we're going to have the conversation with them because sometimes you've got a kid who is kind of a perfectionist or he recognizes that he's struggling and he doesn't know why and he feels bad about himself and we can say, hey, I know exactly what's going on. This is what's
Yeah.
going on with your body. It's going to be happening for several years, but we can adjust and adapt to it. You're still going to have your responsibilities, but we're going to maybe figure out some tools to help you remember better or and all of this is just amazing life skills that we can teach them through something that's a struggle for them and so we
Yeah.
just meet them in that moment in that season.
It's so good, like being able to support them through it, even if they're the one thinking that something's wrong with them.
Right.
Right? Because there's like, then they internalize these things, like
Yes.
just circling back before and thinking about these kind of messages implicitly and explicitly that they're getting from all these outside sources, from school, from society, from peers, all of those things. But then they internalize, like, there must be something wrong with me, or is there something
Right.
wrong with me? I
Right.
recently, one of my children recently had an experience where someone, and it was an adult, unfortunately, said to a group of their peers in their absence, um, I just don't know what you guys all see in him.
Mm,
And it was heartbreaking for me to hear because
man.
he's at the age he'll give it the, he'll say it jokingly like this happened, but I know how crushing that really is.
Right.
And so I had to do the work to say, like, hey, it's not strange to for that if that's playing in your head
Mm-hmm.
repeatedly.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lie.
Right.
I can't
Right.
think of what people wouldn't see in you, and just went on to list all of the things that are wonderful about him. And it was just a sobering reminder to me that as much as we try to like do the work to shelter them in a good way, and anytime I
Right.
say sheltering, I mean it in a good way,
Right.
which is a whole other conversation, but they still will be faced with at different times and in different amounts these attacks on their identity and who they are. And so I like how you shared that, like, even if they're the one struggling with not really like understanding why they're struggling, right?
Hmm.
Or like
Hmm.
feeling, or you can maybe even they don't even verbalize it, but you just see it happening, or you see their countenance change or something like that, to be able to come alongside them and say, like, instead of being the one that's like, what's wrong with you?
Right.
To be
Right.
able to be the one to be
Exactly.
like, hey, I know why you're feeling like something's wrong with you.
We can really make that so different for them. And I love what you said about how they can hear these things and they might be feeling like this in one situation, but they could apply it to several because they've heard the culture say so many things and they can really spiral quickly. And so I love what you said, because I think what you're saying is so important, that we know our boys, that I mean, we know our kids in general, but since we're talking about boys today, that we're students of them. We know by their body language what their frame of mind is. And so
Right.
we're able to interject and like hijack the negative thinking about themselves and be that one who encourages. And I want to say too that as we're doing this, moms, we're actually preparing our sons for marriage. And what I mean by that is we're teaching them, one, to know what to do, be able to express what's inside, to be able to express their emotions, to know when something's wrong, to know how to verbalize it and all that. But also, we're teaching them how women should treat them. Okay. We talk
Mm-hmm.
about this all the time when it comes to girls. We're like, we want our girls to know how a man should treat them. But do we
Yes.
ever say that about our boys? No, we never say that. But it's
It's so
just as true. If we are harping on them, yelling at them, demeaning them, we're telling them that it is okay for a woman to treat them that way. And
true.
then don't be surprised if you don't change your ways. In 10, 15 years, they marry someone who does that very thing to them because they think that's how it works. And
Gosh,
so we
yeah.
need to be super, super careful. Of course, we still need to keep our authority. It's a different relationship,
Right.
but it's still an example
Hmm.
nonetheless. And I think, and then of course, our own marriages should be reflecting respect and honor as well.
You touch on in the book about how important it is, like, for us to respect them, for us to
Hmm.
respect our husbands, and how much that really does help them as boys understand what those relationships are supposed to look like. And it's just like so important as my oldest starts to like approach, like, just seems so rapidly approaching those years. It's just also relevant to me. But you've also mentioned a couple times really quickly about boundaries. And I would
Hmm.
love if you could just share kind of like some specifics, like, hey, these are like the non-negotiable boundaries. Having raised five boys, trust me, these are the non-negotiable boundaries that you really want to keep in place.
Hmm. Well, I think we have to remember that boundaries are important, first of all, because our boys are wired to build, lead, protect, provide, and conquer. And so I repeatedly say this in the book because I want it to be stuck in our brains. So when we're
Mhm.
watching them do things and test boundaries, that we're looking at it through that lens.
Mhm.
Because what can end up happening, I'll give you an example. Let's just say a little boy and his sister and then another brother are there. Okay. And so the one brother gets frustrated with his sister and he hauls off and smacks her or says something mean or whatever. And the other brother comes up and wallops him. Okay. So what happened there? That boy wanted to protect his sister, right? The one who walloped his brother.
Mhm.
He is made to protect. And so although he did it in a way that we would not want him to do it that way. And he needs to be
Right.
taught that you can't just go off and wallop someone. There's a better
Mhm.
way to handle it. What he did was admirable. And
Mhm.
so in terms of why he did it. And so to recognize that and to acknowledge that even first before you correct him
Mhm.
can make such a difference, because you've set the framework. You've said, I see what you're doing here. And I understand that you wanted to protect your sister. And that is a very, very good thing. You want to protect women. You want to protect people who are vulnerable. And what
Mhm.
your brother did was not okay. You're absolutely right about that. However, you hitting him did not make things right.
Right.
And so just being able to understand that there's a way to live out what they were made to do. And so we look at the boundaries with those things in mind. You know, we say by nature they want to lead. Okay. So I'll give another example. I was four of our boys were teenagers, and I don't know, we were going through our homeschool day, and all of a sudden I realized that like I wasn't in charge anymore.
Mhm.
I just didn't. I was like, wait a minute, the boys are actually telling everybody what to do, and I've sort of taken a back seat. And it was like this natural thing for me to let them take the lead because they did it so naturally.
Yeah.
But what I had to say to them was, listen, I see what's happening here. I understand why you have a desire to do this. And actually, you're very good at it because I didn't even notice it was happening. So clearly, you were doing a good job. But I said, now is not the time or the place for that. You are in training right now. And someday you're going to have a wife and kids to lead. This is not that day. I am not that wife. These are not your kids. And
Mm.
so but again, I acknowledged that what they were doing was admirable, but it wasn't the time or the place. And so, just teaching them that to be good leaders, they needed to go through the training that Scripture describes, where it says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, so that it'll go well with you." So, in terms of boundaries, I think we really need to just in every season, it's going to look a little different. With every kid, it's going to look a little different. But
Right.
we want to keep, I think one of the main things is the respect, that
Mhm.
we want to respect them for who they are, but we also need to expect them to respect us. And sometimes as moms, we get a little too far down the nurturing hole,
Mm.
and we want to be really loving. But what
Yeah.
they might need in that moment is alpha mom. They
Right.
might need mom to say, get on the floor, do 10 push-ups right now,
Mhm.
because you're not going to talk to me like that. Because I
Right.
remember one point, our boys were just, they were just being super relaxed and fun and all that. And they referred to me as bruh.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
said, you guys, I'm not your bruh. I'm your mom. And there was just things that just came naturally for me. I think that when they had their little Nerf guns or whatever, I didn't let them shoot me. So don't point that gun at me. Do not
Mhm.
point that gun at mom. You can point it at each other. You can shoot your siblings. That's fine. But do not point it at me. So there was just this, there needed to be that level of respect, I think, was really, really important. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, no, it
Okay.
does. It
Okay. Good.
does because it's still, as you're explaining the boundaries, I love how you're still talking about these times where you've said to your sons, this isn't necessarily wrong that you're this way. This is just not the time and place. And I just feel
Right.
like that distinction is like critical,
Hmm.
right? Because a
Hmm.
lot of times they want to like step into that role because it is their nature.
Right.
And oftentimes they're getting the response that they're wrong.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
then that message is that you need to like get rid of that or you need to suppress that as
Right.
opposed to this is a good thing you were designed this way. It's just not the time or the place yet.
Right. Right. And if you can give them a little bit to do in
Mm,
that moment, you might be able to give them something. Also be looking for opportunities to let them experience what it's like to be in leadership. For instance, we had a son who's right smack in the middle, Mr. Black and White, defender of justice, and he was not afraid to tell everyone what was right and wrong and then try to right the wrong if he could. And not always in good ways. And so finally I thought, this kid he's actually a leader. That's what he is. So I'm going to give him a chance to lead. And I think he was probably about 12 at the time. And then he had two siblings, 10 and 8. And I said, okay, here's an outdoor project that I need done, a yard project.
mm,
And I'm giving you your two siblings as your employees. So you're the boss. You're ultimately responsible for how this job turns out.
mhm.
These are your employees. And of course, the employees weren't very happy either about
Right.
having to work for this boss. And I said, well, you get to practice working for a boss you really don't like,
Great.
or aren't crazy about, right? So I want there to be respect. I want there to be honor. If I hear anything other than that, there will be some discipline and some consequences. But here you go. And if you get it done in this amount of time, there will be some sort of reward when you're done. And I walked away and I just let them figure it out. And, they did. They figured it out. And I think our son realized it wasn't quite as great to be in charge as he was hoping. And so, but they need that experience because I think that it helps them realize that, whoa, maybe this isn't as great as I was thinking it was going to be, or maybe I'm not as good at this as I thought I was. And I actually do need to learn a little bit more about this. So
Yeah.
giving them the opportunities to do that. And the other thing I want to say about boundaries is just when we think about disciplining our kids, specifically our boys, I want to just describe two. I look at it as training. So to me, discipline is training. It's not
Mm,
punishment. It's not punitive. It's training. So two examples, same situation. Dad tells son, "It's Monday. You have till Friday to get this wood split and stacked."
mhm.
And the weekend comes. He was lazy. He didn't finish the job, and now the family's going to go do something fun. And
Mm.
so dad says, nope, sorry, son, you do not get to go with us because you didn't complete the task. Because see, those are natural consequences for not being responsible, right? For being lazy. And then, but it's not punitive. It's just this job isn't finished. If it were finished, you could come with us. But,
Right.
basically you're teaching them time management, responsibility, all those kinds of things. The other type of training is when the dad's out there chopping wood and he looks at his son and he says, I want you to come out here and help me. And the son says, well, am I being punished? Are these consequences? He says, no, this is just something that I feel like a skill that I feel like you need to know as a man. And so I want to teach that to you. So it's more like proactive, like for the future.
Yeah.
Um, not just consequences for failure, but also proactive saying, here's another skill I think would be super valuable to you. And so let's spend some time working on it. And that's another
Yeah.
way to train. So two different ways to train. And so as we're doing this, we're teaching them self-regulation. We're teaching them, things that are just so important for adulthood.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up work because in the book you talk about how important it is for boys to understand like that work is a gift from the
Right.
Lord and also
Mhm.
how boys need a mission. Could you speak to that a little bit also?
Absolutely. I heard a wise mom of boys once say that she believed her main job as a mom of boys was to employ and exhaust.
Mm,
So taking that energy, putting it into something productive on a regular basis. And yes, I do talk about how work is a gift from the Lord. And that building a strong work ethic in our boys is it is one of the greatest gifts we can give them because our kids can have all kinds of skills and abilities, but if they don't have work ethic, those skills and abilities aren't going to serve them
right.
nearly as well. And so when our kids have good, strong work ethics, it gives them a lot more opportunities. And I can't tell you how much feedback we've gotten from our kids' as employees who have said, man, your kids know how to work. They know teamwork, they know all the things that are important for having a strong work ethic. But
Yeah.
when we give our boys a strong work ethic, we're teaching them perseverance and resilience. We're bringing out heart issues that need to be dealt with as we're in this process of instilling the strong work ethic. We
Yeah.
give them something to conquer. And that's where the mission comes in. It's so important to understand that boys typically have three questions going through their minds all the time. It's let's see, what is it? Who's in charge? Who's on my team? And what's our mission?
Mm,
Basically. And so when they start misbehaving, and I'm not making excuses for sin, but I'm saying when you see them sort of going off the rails, probably one or more of those questions are rolling through their mind and they need to be reminded who's in charge, who's on their team, and what's our mission. And so
good.
we want to give them answers to those questions as much as possible. In little things, it's everything from just they're with you, you're getting out of the car to go into the house, hey boys, I need your help bringing in the groceries. I mean, it's constant. Anytime you can engage them in some sort of help activity and then praise them for it,
Yeah.
that really builds our boys up. And it just requires us to be present, to show up, to be present, to be aware that they need this, and to be looking all the time for things for them to do. And I'm not saying they should never have free time. Absolutely. They
Right.
should have time outside. They should have time to create and do those things. But I think like in our daily rhythms that this should be worked into our daily rhythms. And so as they build this work ethic, as we build this work ethic in them, we're also building confidence and skill sets, and we're preparing them for life.
So to connect that a little bit with homeschooling, right? Because all these things apply anyway, right? And
Right.
all these things are wisdom anyway and great strategy anyway. But for the moms that are homeschooling, I mean, you homeschooled all five of your boys, all eight of your children.
Mm-hmm.
How did it look different homeschooling your boys versus homeschooling your girls?
Well, it was a lot more physical activity going on, like being able to go jump on the trampoline between subjects. And this was the beauty of homeschooling is that I could build into our days the amount of time that it was necessary for them to do their math, have 10 minutes on the trampoline, riding their bike, whatever. Sometimes they chose to do something calm like Legos, but most of the time, especially in the early years, it was physical activity. The Legos, I think, were more like, I need to conquer this project that I'm working on, trying to finish something. And so they might go to that. But either way, there was a reset for them.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot more physical activity, a lot more hands on experiences. And this is where, when we ran into problems with curriculum and schoolwork, sometimes it meant I had to reduce the number of words, because that's a really strong message in my book about how often boys need us to use less words, and that includes their curriculum. They get overwhelmed, paralyzed by too many words. And so, especially in the early years, they handle it better the older they get, but they need a lot of hands-on, a lot of experiences. But when I would run into trouble with curriculum, I would often ask myself, does he need to know this now? Does he even need to know this at all? Like diagramming sentences, to me, that's up for grabs, whatever. If you like it and you want to do it, great. If not, we'll move on. I was fine with that. So we get to pick and choose what we feel like is a good fit. And also not just what they like to do, but also that I think we as moms will know when it's like, no, I think you need to persevere in this. But I think generally that happens later on down the road. In the early years, we want to keep it as fun as possible because we are they're building their relationship with learning. And we want them, when they think about learning, to think of a positive experience, positive emotions, not negative ones. And so we just have to be careful in the early years that we make sure that it's as positive as we possibly can. I think that a lot of times they needed to learn things through experience rather than reading a book. A lot of times the best thing was for them to have the experience and then read the book, because it helped them relate back to something they had already experienced with all of their senses, you know?
Right.
The other thing is, I found that my boys really were less relational when it came to the schoolwork. They didn't want to do a bunch of stuff with me or as a group. They wanted to just sit down, do their work, and get through it as fast as they could. So that because every day they had their independent time in the afternoon, and that was their carrot, man. So getting through the schoolwork, and I kept it reasonable so that it was doable for them. And from kindergarten to 8th grade, they were always done by noon. The kindergartners hardly did anything, but incrementally more as they got older. And I talk about this in the 4-hour school day. But basically, I made it possible for them to be done by noon if they pretty much kept their nose to the grindstone. Even in 8th grade, they could be done by noon. Again, incrementally less the younger they were. But that afternoon time for them was gold. They loved it. And I was trying to be as consistent as possible with it. So we didn't have a ton of outside activities. We were really a stay-at-home homeschooling family, but we had one day a week that we went to a co-op, and then we went to church on Sundays, and we had people over on the weekends and things like that. But there was 4 days a week where it was directed learning in the morning, and then self-directed in the afternoons. And they loved that. And so what they wanted me to do was basically leave them alone, and let them own what they were doing. So I didn't hover over them. I helped them become independent as early as possible. And they loved that. And they knew every day, open up those workbooks and do this amount of work. And then we'll go over it before I cut you loose. And then you're done for the day. And so it was never really a drag for them. They actually enjoyed it as much as a boy can enjoy it. But also always with that carrot in mind, that they were going to get to go out, create, and shoot each other. They loved airsoft, and they loved that. All the camo and all the things. They loved all the boy things, and digging holes where they could, get down in these holes and shoot. And they had a ball. So, and they have so many memories together. It's amazing. That's what I love about homeschooling, is that our kids, the siblings, are still to this day, they love to be together, and they love to talk about all the things they did while they were growing up. And it's just so much fun to see. But it required a lot of time and effort and intention from me.
Yeah. It's like you're getting to see the fruit of your labor, but it was labor.
It was absolutely true. Yes. And I can say it was absolutely worth it. Absolutely.
Yeah. My grandmother was over the other day, and it was one of those days where I really did feel like I had to stay on top of everybody, which isn't my favorite.
Sure.
I do have sort of the kind of personality where it's like, come on, guys, you know what you need to do. I made the expectation clear. Let's just do it. Right. So that I don't have to be on you. But it was really one of those days where I had to just keep being like, which again is not really my favorite. And my grandmother was like, and it kind of is her personality, which is kind of funny. And she was like, it really is a lot of work being the director of everybody, isn't it? And I was like, it is. Like, I don't like, because I'm tired, right? And sometimes, there are times, when to back off and pick your battles and things like that. You can't be on 24/7. But I also have started to realize that there are times that like it is necessary, or I'm going to like eat the rotten fruit of not doing that too.
Exactly.
But like the opposite is also true. And so, Yeah, it's encouraging to hear that you're like, yeah, it was hard and it was tiring, but I'm seeing like the fruit of my labor. So that's really, really
Yeah,
cool. And I feel like
absolutely.
that's the beauty of us as moms that are not as far along in the journey, getting to be able to hear from the experiences and the wisdom of the moms that are like ahead of us on the path for
Yes.
to just know, like, come on, just keep going.
Yeah,
You
and
can do
it's
it.
it's not because I did everything perfectly. Like I want
Right.
to reiterate that I was not a perfect mom. I was not a perfect homeschooling mom. I will say that I clung to the Lord with all of my might
Mhm.
and asked him for wisdom. I can't even tell you how many times. It was like every single day, countless times when I was like, I don't even know what to do. And especially with the boys, sometimes I'd be like, what is happening? And I would go to my husband and he'd say, oh, here's what's happening.
Mhm.
Because he knows how they think and he helped me tune into that and then know how to respond to them in a respectful way, but in a very clear way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You gave, I can't remember the exact example, but you gave an example like that in the very beginning of the book
Yeah.
about a situation that your husband handled completely differently than you would have. And
Yes.
I cracked up because I'm like, yep, same. And usually I struggle with like letting him
Yes.
do things with them that is outside of how I would handle it.
Right.
And there's so many times that he's like, trust me, like, and I'm like, okay, okay. So when I read that, I laughed and I read it to him. I'm like, you're really gonna like this book. So
Yeah,
I
they're a
really
great
appreciate the book
resource. They
too.
really are, but it just means sometimes we have to let go and
Yeah,
just trust, because,
especially with the boys.
especially with the boys. Yes.
So how can moms, Durenda, connect with you more? Like they're like, okay, this is great, but I need this consistent encouragement and wisdom. Where can they find you and how can they get the book?
Okay, well, all of my books, including Raising Boys to Men, are all on Amazon. The audiobook for Raising Boys to Men is actually on my website, durendawilson.com/audiobooks. And so you can just go to the site and navigate your way there pretty easily because my site is very clean and easy. It's very user friendly.
Great.
And then also I have a podcast, the Durenda Wilson podcast. I have over 540 episodes. And the really cool thing is that if you go to the podcast page of my website, there's a search bar there. It won't be on Apple or Spotify, although my podcast is there as well. But there's a search bar there that you can put in keywords. So if you're just looking for
Oh,
stuff on high school, you're just looking for stuff
yeah.
on littles, you're looking for stuff on discipline, parenting, those are the episodes that will come up.
Oh, that's
And
great.
yeah, so super helpful, especially if you're new and you're like, I don't even know where to start. Start with what you really need to hear right now, and tons of encouragement. So I just encourage you to go there. And my website is durendawilson.com.
Okay, and I'll put that in the show notes. I'm excited for that helpful information because I will be in that search bar for sure.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it.
So thank you so much for meeting with me. I'm so excited for everyone who's going to get to hear this and get to connect with you more. And I hope we get a chance to talk again really soon.
I'd love that. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed getting a chance to hear from Durenda herself about her new book, Raising Boys to Men, and all of the extra wisdom that she shared with us today. She is a wealth of information and wisdom for us moms who are raising and especially homeschooling boys. Thank you for listening to the Rooted Home Life podcast. Don't forget to follow us so that you don't miss an episode, which is airing bi-weekly and will cover a variety of topics all related to cultivating home and chasing adventure with our children.